Good morning, I'm Claire Murphy. Welcome to the Solo Bureau. Late last week, Donald Trump posted on his social media that his Board of Peace, set up to help oversee the rebuild of Gaza in the aftermath of the destructive war with Israel, had come to an historic agreement. Hamas, who'd been holding off on handing over their guns, the one sticking point that had seen a roadblock to the peace agreement moving forward, had agreed to disarm. But Israel aren't convinced. And how much can we trust the militant group to simply stand down when they've shown in the past that they are willing to go to some extreme lengths to continue the fight? More on that in a tick with the very excellent Dr. Jessica Gnauer. But let's see what's been happening while you were sleeping. It's Tuesday, August 4. Former Army veteran and One Nation State President Warren Pickering has been named to lead the party at the Victorian state election. Voters have been given just 4 months to get to know and understand the candidates One Nation is putting forward to run in November. Party federal leader Pauline Hanson banning several media outlets from the press conference, announcing 7 upper house candidates in Melbourne yesterday. Pickering defended the choice to bar the ABC and The Guardian from the event, saying they're open to scrutiny but will take swift legal action against any perceived character assassination attempts. Pickering also shut down any talk of forming a coalition with the Victorian Liberals, saying they intend for this to be a November to remember and that they're contesting to govern the state. One Nation plans to run a candidate in every lower house seat. One of the claimants bringing charges against former radio broadcaster Alan Jones has told the court he feared he would lose everything if he reported being assaulted. Jones faced the first day of his sexual assault trial yesterday, where 6 complainants are alleging the 85-year-old indecently assaulted or sexually touched them in several incidents between 2003 and 2020. Jones has pleaded not guilty to all 22 counts. The complainant who gave evidence said he was just 14 and an aspiring athlete when he met Jones, who years later gave him a car and a phone for him to travel to training, as well as paying him a weekly allowance of $400 so he could focus on sport. He alleges that payment increased to $600 after the alleged assault. After the incident, which the complainant described as being kissed with a chomping motion, the slobbering contact leading to him having to wipe his face, Jones allegedly told him he'd been a really good boy and he was going to give him more money. The complainant said he didn't say yes to the advances, but he was scared of losing all the things Jones was offering, so didn't do everything he could to push him away. Jones's barrister accused the complainants of concocting their stories, saying the allegations at the heart of the case were treacherous, double-dealing, money, hatred, desperation and opportunism. The Melbourne businessman whose identity had been suppressed despite being found guilty of rape has now been identified. Ralph Carr, a celebrity agent who has represented stars including singers Kate Ceberano and Vanessa Amorosi, and who was once married to Tina Arena, abandoned the legal order protecting his identity, but his lawyer said his client will appeal the verdict handed down earlier this year. The 66-year-old found guilty of raping and sexually assaulting a woman at his Melbourne home in 2023. Carr is awaiting sentencing. Iranian authorities say they have no plans to undertake peace talks with the US, despite US President Donald Trump saying they were taking place. Trump announced massive attacks on Iran this past weekend, but then abruptly called them off, saying that talks were planned, saying on Sunday he's not looking to kill people, he'd rather make a deal.
Well, now what we're doing is we're talking to them in the form of a negotiation. It begins tomorrow afternoon, and we'll see if it's true. I'd love to do that, save a lot of lives, save a lot of unnecessary power, to be honest with you.
Iran's Foreign Ministry spokesman Esmail Baghaei rejected the claim, saying no negotiations with the United States were taking place and no meetings were scheduled. Lawyers for the European Football Association, UEFA, have informed FIFA that they are actively considering legal action over the FFE. FIFA boss Gianni Infantino's secretive proposal to raise US $4.2 billion from investors, including from Joshua Kushner, the brother of US President Donald Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, was dropped on Saturday after it provoked global backlash. UEFA saying all their members would boycott the World Cup if it went ahead. The legal letter names 18 FIFA executives who they say should retain all their data so that any potential evidence is not destroyed, and that they want the end of Infantino's 10-year presidency. Aussie Queen Mary's daughter Isabella has begun her military service in Denmark. The 19-year-old checked into the barracks where she'll spend the next 11 months alongside around 1,600 other young people across the country. Due to the changing security situation in Europe, Denmark has upped its basic military service from 4 months to 11 and has brought in compulsory service for women aged over 18. The second oldest child of Queen Mary and King Frederick is amongst the first cohort of women to undergo the training. Unlike her counterparts, she's opted not to be paid for her service. Those are your top stories. Next, how serious can we take Hamas and their sudden agreement to lay down arms in the pursuit of peace in Gaza? Last week, President Donald Trump took to social media and announced that the Board of Peace had reached an agreement with Hamas and all other armed groups in Gaza. Trump called it a monumental step towards lasting peace and security, a critical step towards Gaza finally being governed by a new Palestinian government that will work closely with the Board of Peace to help the Palestinian people. He went on to say that at the same time, Israel will have the peace it deserves, with Gaza no longer used as a base for terror attacks. This has been where Trump's 20-point peace plan had been stuck since it was signed off on by Hamas and Israel on October 9 last year, coming into effect on October 10. On the condition of disarmament, Hamas says they won't do it until Israel withdraws. But Israel has said that it has serious security concerns about this deal, saying they believe Hamas is actually actively rebuilding its military capability rather than planning on winding it down. Dr. Jessica Gnawa is an Associate Professor in International Relations at the University of New South Wales. Welcome back to the Solo Bureau.
Thanks for having me on again.
Jessica, Trump says a lot of things. He has things going on a lot of different fronts right now. It doesn't always turn out to be the case when he tells us that things are stopping, things are signed off on, because he doesn't seem to be on the same page as the other side who are also signing on to these agreements. But in this instance, from obviously what we can gather from a militant group based in Gaza who are not an official government body, they seem to be willing to negotiate this demilitarization of their group. How true do you think that is?
So it's partly true, but there are definitely some complicating factors. So one thing that we need to pay attention to is the fact that the current leader of Hamas is a character called Khalil al-Hayya, and he's actually not located in Gaza. So he is the one that this sort of Gaza executive board that's part of Trump's Board of Peace organization have mainly been talking to from Hamas, and he's the one who said, yes, Hamas broadly agrees with some conditions that I'll come to in a minute. But even if he kind of agrees on behalf of all of Hamas, this is still problematic in terms of implementation because we could face what we often call commitment problems, which is where a leader might commit a group to a certain action. But the question is, do they actually have the authority and the leverage to ensure that every single member of that group aligns with that directive? So in this case, that would be, is every single member of the Hamas group and various other militant groups that have, supposedly said they also might be willing to disarm that are in the Gaza Strip, would they actually do this on the ground, particularly when that leader is not actually located in Gaza, so is not monitoring that situation on the ground? So that's one issue. A second issue is that Hamas has said, yes, in principle, we could agree to disarm, but there are definitely conditions. And a key condition for Hamas is that Israel starts the immediate withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. So Israeli forces are still in the Gaza Strip. When that ceasefire was announced about 9 months ago now, I think, if I'm correct on the timeline, Israel was occupying just a little more than 50% of the Gaza Strip, and they've actually occupied more in the meantime. So they're now up to about sort of approximately 60%. And for Hamas, they want to see that immediate withdrawal before they disarm, or at most at the same time. Whereas Israel has said, on the other hand, they're not going to withdraw until Hamas has fully disarmed. So we can already see an issue here with the timeline. Hamas is not going to fully disarm, and then wait and then have Israel withdraw. And on the other hand, Israel's not likely to withdraw before Hamas starts to disarm. And then, of course, another issue is, even with all of those factors, how would this actually be practically carried out on the ground? Like there are ideas around a sort of an international stabilization force that might go in, a sort of Palestinian police force that might get trained up and would be the ones to actually take those weapons from Hamas fighters. But then there are a whole lot of questions about who would those people be? How would they be trained? It's not really easy to get in and out of the Gaza Strip. So would they be Palestinians from Gaza who need to kind of go out for training and come back in? Would they be from the West Bank, which would have, all kinds of complexities of its own? So there are definitely more questions around the details of this than answers at this stage.
Does Israel want to withdraw from the Gaza Strip, even if Hamas did hand over all of their weapons? They have occupied, as you said, more territory since that ceasefire has been agreed upon. And it feels like in the aftermath of this new announcement from Donald Trump, they then launched fresh strikes, killing some more people. That felt very pointed. But do they actually want this conflict to end like this, in your opinion?
So the way that I would read Benjamin Netanyahu's government is that they do not want to withdraw at the moment from the Gaza Strip. So since the events of October 7, Benjamin Netanyahu's anyway quite sort of nationalist, hardline government has, if anything, become even more so. And I would say that no, they do not want to withdraw, or if they were going to, it would absolutely only be after there was a full and complete disarmament, whatever that might mean, of any sort of militant fighter within the Gaza Strip. And that's just probably not a realistic expectation of what's going to happen. This would need to be a sort of a mutual thing for it to happen. Not only do they probably not want to withdraw, but they also don't want to see Hamas continuing in any way, shape, or form. So they really want to see the disarmament, but also ensure that Hamas can't have any kind of governance role in Gaza going forward. And this is where Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu finds himself in quite a difficult situation, because on the one hand, he has his own government who are very much pressuring him not to give any ground when it comes to what Hamas might want, or, Israel's position around the Gaza Strip. And on the other hand, he has President Trump, who now has very much in his interests seeing some kind of a deal take place, some kind of movement, and what Trump could claim as progress on what's happening in Gaza, because Trump is now seeing not only that he's not managing to make any kind of peace with Iran and sort of make a deal or fix or resolve that situation in any way, but also that absolutely no progress has been made on Gaza, which was a situation that he said he would be able to resolve quite quickly. And this has been sort of held up as, a first kind of test case almost for Trump's board of peace. So the fact that it hasn't really progressed at all doesn't look good for Trump. So Benjamin Netanyahu is feeling that pressure from both sides. And I think, as is often the case, I think he'll probably come down a little bit more on domestic interests and domestic concerns, particularly because he has an election coming up as well. So I think he might say to Trump that he's willing to move on this or that, but in the end won't really end up moving.
Can I ask, when you mention bend to domestic pressure, we know what some of his government is pressuring him to do, because he has some far-right factions who are very vocal about how they feel about the situation in Gaza. But what about the people on the ground in Israel? What is the sort of public opinion of what's currently happening and what has happened in Gaza? I mean, obviously, there are concerns for their own safety. They don't want a repeat of October 7. They don't want to see people harmed in that way again. Obviously, they're worried about that occurring. So disarming Hamas is probably quite important to them. But at the same time, they've witnessed what their government has done in Gaza. And I have seen people protest against that in Israel itself. What is public opinion like on this current situation?
Yeah, so I think that's a good question. And in some ways, there are kind of certain complexities around the response that I probably won't manage to capture everything in this answer. But I think that certainly, if we're sort of thinking about the perspective of the Israeli people, the October 7 events loom very large in the kind of national sort of story and imagination, if you will. And very much that feels like, to us in Australia might feel like, well, that happened now a few years ago, but within Israel, I would say that's still very, very fresh in the sort of public memory. And so in that regard, the disarmament issue is probably a key issue that people would be concerned about. On the other hand, there is definitely, there's starting to be a bit of that fatigue around. I mean, Israel has engaged in this long war with Hamas, with obviously massive destruction of the Gaza Strip, as you mentioned, and ongoing sort of costs there, human life, infrastructure, etc. Is currently engaged still in southern Lebanon. So there are still troops in southern Lebanon and has been actively engaged in the war with Iran. So I think there is also a feeling amongst some sections of the population that it would really be a good thing if the Israeli government could start to extract itself from some of these increasingly sort of just looking like ongoing forever wars on multiple fronts. So there is that feeling, that sentiment as well. But definitely the government itself is one of the most sort of hard right governments that Israel has ever had. So it is, I think, quite unlikely at this stage that sort of more kind of war fatigue would win over, rather than taking a sort of hard line, emphasizing only sort of defense as or offense as a kind of a security defense, when it comes to the way that Israel is probably going to relate to Hamas going forward.
Just finally, save every single current member of Hamas and other militant groups in Gaza lining up with their guns at the very same moment that Israel steps back over the border. What's the likely outcome of this? Is this another case of there's a lot of documents signed, promises made, and then this just continues on for however long?
So I think that a real issue with the way that we've seen under the Trump presidency, the approach to sort of conflict negotiations, but also the post-conflict peace building or nation building. And I'm not necessarily saying that we had perfect examples of this before the Trump administration. So it's not that necessarily Trump has done a terribly worse job than other sort of leaders in the past, because this is a really tricky and kind of complex terrain, particularly when you're going into someone else's country, someone else's territory. It's like there's so many complexities around that. But I think that what we have found under the Trump administration is much more emphasis on trying to make these big statements about things that have been agreed or things that are moving or successes that are going to happen, and a lot less emphasis on making sure that there's a really strong network of people on the ground who really know what they're doing, and preferably people from local groups, local actors who are involved, directly in the conflict and understand reconstruction and all of those things. So making sure there's really strong networks of people who are supported to build the capabilities that they need or to have the resources that they need in order to carry out the reconstruction and the rebuilding. So we really haven't seen any depth or thought gone into what does rebuilding look like for a whole society, for people, where the infrastructure's been devastated, but also all of the kind of human and social effects of that. What does reconstruction really look like? What does it mean to make sure that there's supports for that sort of human capability to be in place and to be developed? And we just haven't seen any of that kind of serious attention to the long-term picture. Of course, reconstruction is something that takes decades, in many cases. And then there are issues around justice and reconciliation and all of those type of issues, which haven't even been touched at all either. So unfortunately, I don't see a very sort of good outcome going forward. Yes, we might get this announcement. There might be some attempt at disarmament of Hamas. There might be some partial withdrawal of Israeli forces. But overall, we're still looking at a pretty similar conflict picture and context of conflict between Israel and Hamas and the situation on the ground. And then, of course, if we look more broadly across the Middle East and the way that sort of President Trump's interventions have fallen, we're not really seeing, major shifts, or certainly not in a positive direction around the conflict environment.
Dr. Jessica Gnauer making a very, very complex situation at least slightly easier for us to understand. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks for hanging out with me today, team. Before we go, I want to tell you about another fun thing that I'm working on. In case you missed it, I recently announced that I am starring in a play that my friend and fellow redundancy buddy Kirsch co-wrote called The Algorithm of Us. Now, when I say star in it, I'm actually playing an AI character, so I don't physically appear in person on stage, but my voice and face certainly do. It is a really funny take on the current state of corporate Australia, and it's debuting at Sydney Fringe in September. But before we get there, we're doing a fundraising night on Thursday, August 13. It's dinner, drinks, and a lineup of very funny comedians. It's called The Exit Interview. 4 comedians, a magician, unlimited pizza, 0 performance reviews. On the bill, Daniel Muggleton, one of Australia's biggest touring comedians, Michael Hing, Triple J and The Project, you might have seen him on, Andrew Bauer and Emma Ann Comedina, corporate survivors turned comedians, and Trace of Magic, some live magic, hosted, of course, by yours truly. You'll also get an exclusive first look at BCD Theatre's new production, The Algorithm of Us. It's a corporate satire about a data analyst and a management consultant who discover spreadsheets are easier than feelings. Every ticket sold to this fundraising night goes toward bringing this show to the stage. Thursday, August 13, 6 p.m. at Soul Trap Bar, Surrey Hills. You get 3 drinks and unlimited pizza. Now, the ticket is $115, which I understand might be a little prohibitive right now because there are many of us who are not doing great financially. So here's the thing. For Solo Bureau listeners only, you get a special discount code. It's Claire's Discount, all one word, and it brings it down to $95. Not a bad deal for unlimited pizza, 3 drinks, and a whole bunch of comedians and a really fun night, and we all get to hang out. But of course, please do not feel obligated. I know cash is tight for many of us, but if you can, we would love to see you there. The link is in the show notes. Okay, that's it for today. Have a tops one. I'll catch you tomorrow.